Dahl probably wrote Mr. Fox to be an animal version of himself. When we were writing it, we sort of, without ever putting it into words, that was sort of intuitively what we were doing. We spent time at his house while we were writing, and a lot of the details of his life sort of found their way into our story and into his character.
Wes said, whenever we can, let's just bring Dahl into this and let's use him as an inspiration. It's kind of like we're trying to bring him to life in the spaces that we're building here.
It was no question Gypsy House influenced him, I think, enormously. I think he felt close to Roll here. Every book Roll wrote, every draft of every book is in the archives in the museum in the village. He was able to look at early drafts of the book, and also the most enchanting notebook that Rod did and illustrated himself. All those things moved him greatly, I think. He said, I'd like the look of the film to be like Donald Chaffin's illustrations. Donald Chaffin was the first person to illustrate Fantastic Mr. Fox. And on the cover of that book, there is the tree. So I said to Wes, well, actually, the real tree exists, and it's just a little way up the lane from Gypsy House. It's a big beech tree, which was amazing. About a year later, sadly, this probably 150-year-old tree fell. It just collapsed into the field and is now horizontal rather than vertical and covered in brambles. But, trees have lives.
Some of those images literally resonated in Wes's mind since he had this book as a child and have kind of come back to life. And in fact, we even contacted the illustrator. He came over and visited us, and he things for us on the film because we were like, well, these images in some ways were an inspiration.
He wrote in a small hut in the orchard, some quiet, sacred place. It's very cozy and it's very basic. And that's what he loved. Typical Wes. It's Fantastic Mr. Fox's office. And he's even gone as far as making there's a little yellow porcelain mug with a Staffordshire mug, actually, an antique one that he kept his pencils in. He's copied everything.
By the end of the film, we'll have about 120 sets, unique sets, which is quite an undertaking. If you're working on a live-action film, you find environments that you liked, and then you might build sets for interiors and such, but we have to come up with everything from scratch. That in itself is quite an undertaking.
He's a great one for prop direction, Wes. He's fanatical, I think, about prop placement. We can spend 24 hours placing small props on the edge of frames and making sure things have got the right design painted on them and things like that. That's a very Wes thing. I think if you look at Life Aquatic, the art direction is really there. And I think that's what he's bringing to this.
Wes didn't know how much work it was going to be when he started out, but he's embraced it because, he loves his work, and he loves, I think, the idea that he can really create every bit of the image that's on the screen. Someone who comes from a live-action background, you're used to a set dresser having a bunch of things sitting on a table, and you say, well, what could we put on this table? And they'll pull out, well, we've got this vase or this coffee cup. And here, we're having to think about that in advance, and he'll say, okay, well, let's make a coffee cup that looks like the coffee cup that I saw in this restaurant in New York, and we can create that. And I think that ability to really sculpt the image on every level is, for someone who's so visual, it's daunting, but it's an amazing process.
Many, many objects that are in the film are from Gypsy House. Wes had every lampshade, every object in the house photographed, and then chose what he wanted and had little miniatures made of them.
My favorite sets by far are the interiors, especially the Fox family home. When we first see the home, it's unfurnished, and he's thinking about renting it, and after they move in, they do a lot of work. They're so rich and textured and patterned. They're very beautiful and very intimate, and again, quite odd and unique. It's going to be really quite a beautiful set.
Our idea of the movie was that it was going to take place in autumn, and for there to be mud. The whole movie takes place in the mud. This didn't really happen. Mud is not easy in stop motion. We ended up having no green and almost no blue. If you take green and blue out, it looks like this.
It's a very cozy, very warm look. It's very real, if you like. Puppets benefit a lot from modelling, from making them stand out from the background, because they're not human beings. Human beings have got highly reflective eyes, their skin takes light in a certain way, and you haven't got that with puppets. You have to make them stand out in a different way. So the way you light them is very specific to what they're made of, and these are made of fur, not clay, so I had to find a way to do that. This particular scene is very special in the film because it's set in a cider cellar, and the brief was that it should be self-illuminating. So all the light in the cellar comes through the bottles as if the bottles themselves are alight. If you move a bottle just half an inch, a couple of centimeters, it'll go dark because the light isn't refracting through it in the right way. So every single bottle you see on those shelves has been placed and moved so that the light comes through it in the right way. And every time we move the camera, we have to re-lens a number of those bottles so that there aren't dark patches behind. So it's quite fun in that way to make that sort of rather special environment work.
It's kind of a unique take of a Roald Dahl story. It's both very naturalistic in some ways and then very sort of artificial and contrived in others. We're really expecting people to take on board the fact that there's a badger dressed in a very nicely styled business suit sitting behind a big oak desk inside of a law office, and we're treating it kind of seriously. So it's a very strange mix.
We've had this kind of idea that let's try and keep the handmade quality to keep this really fun to look at. So we've been trying to do things like a lot of the special effects, smoke and things like that. We've been doing them with cotton wool and trying to keep it feeling very organic. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that this is going to look like some kind of after-school arts and crafts project. We're doing that at a very, very high level so that it really, at the same time, would be something that your average person is not even going to think about, okay, this is how it was done.
Those things are always a challenge because you have to stylize them somewhat and then figure out, how far you're going to chase reality. And they take time. When you have big scenes full of smoke and fire and you're trying to do that smoke just with cotton wool in front of the camera, it is really difficult, but fun, and ultimately I think it's very interesting to look at.
It's very lavish and very detailed, and yet very restrained in a lot of ways. He's created sort of a very tight sort of spectrum in which we could do this film, both with detail, color, patterns, overall look. And so I think we've come up with something that's quite unique because of that.
Everything magically seems to look better than we could have pictured it or that I could have pictured it. There's always sort of, you come up with an idea and you think, well, maybe this is a bit crazy, we're going to try and do this or really hope it works out. And then when we've seen it realized, it's been like, wow, it really did work. These worlds and these images and the animation and these characters are really coming to life. Every prop, every little thing is like made by someone who's just an expert artist.